So just for me, a very, very brief overview about us, and hopefully you're already a little bit, relatively well aware. But so our overarching kind of ambition, we call people in the lead, and you may have heard this before, and we support communities to thrive, and that's what we're all about, and that's what we wanted to talk about today. And we believe, and hopefully again this will come across, that when people are in the lead, communities thrive. And that sounds like sort of jargon or a nice sort of phrase, but it really runs throughout everything we do. We honestly think that people who live in neighborhoods and communities and areas all over the UK know best what they want, what they need, how to solve local problems, what their assets are. So that's our starting point. And we obviously have changed our name, and we'll hear a tiny bit more about that, to really make that connection between national lottery players and the money that we are able to give. So it makes a lot of sense, National Lottery Fund, I hope, to all of you. So we have some principles, which should be up there, great, which we, again, this is the sort of golden thread that runs through all of our grant making in all of our countries and across the UK. And the first thing that we say is that we are for everyone. That seems sort of like a no-brainer, but we realize that some groups and organizations and individuals may need more support or more time with us. That's absolutely fine. So we work with and for everyone, no matter what their starting point is. And that one is perhaps the most important to me. We also focus on the strengths people bring. So we are a real asset-based, or we're trying to be an asset-based funder. We try to be a catalyst for others. In other words, we listen and learn, as I said before, from people and from communities, and we try and help them to do what they want and do what matters to them. We talk about shared direction, diverse approaches. We are very proud to value and fund diversely and diverse groups and diverse communities who we work with, again, who we believe kind of know best what they want and need. We, again, focus on competence, not control. That means that we, as far as we possibly can, absolutely trust people rather than trying to control with money or with anything else. And we trust people's abilities to make good things happen. Simple processes, good judgments. Maybe some of you who have applied in the past or are considering applying now for funding can tell us whether this is working, but we are really trying to be much more proportionate. So hopefully, if any of you, for example, have applied for an Awards for All grant, you will have really noticed that we have stripped the process way back, made it much simpler, quicker, easier to access. But you tell us whether that's working. And last but not least, we try to use our resources well, and again, that's the money that comes from National Lottery players. And we try to use both our money, but also we try to be a knowledge-based funder, really understanding local context and people before we make a decision. So just a tiny bit about us. We have an annual budget of around £600 million a year. The largest chunk of that goes out through England. For example, this past year, about 400 million would have gone out through England, but obviously we operate in all across the UK. And we have three main ways of doing that. We call them funding products, but they're just ways of funding. National Lottery Awards for All, those are our very small grants, so up to £10,000. We have our standard grants, which you may know if you're in England, are called Reaching Communities. And then we have our slightly more complex partnerships grants. And both standard and partnerships are anything from £10,000 up. They can be multi-millions, they can be 50,000. It's really up to people what they want and what they need. And last but not least, a few things that have changed and some advances that we've made in the past couple of years, I'd say. One is that we are principle-based, and I went through those principles with you just now. Another, service design framework. That may, again, sound like a bit of jargon, but to us that means that we use customer insight and community insight and staff, frontline funding staff insight to change and adapt the way we fund and what we're learning all the time. So we really try and put, again, the people who seem to know best, which is some of our frontline funding staff, everyone in communities who come to us, to kind of change and adapt, making our funding easier to apply for, but also making good things happen in communities. And as part of that, again, in England, we've had some pretty major changes recently. We have, in the past year and a half, changed from being quite a central funder with a lot of our staff in Birmingham and Newcastle processing grants, doing a great job at doing it centrally, to moving the vast majority of our funding staff in England are now out and about in communities. So we made a big wholesale change, and we've got 150 of our frontline staff now out and about living and working in the communities that they are trying to get to know. And we think that that helps with our funding decisions. And last but not least, across the National Lottery Community Fund, we are focusing on conversations, not forms. So now, if people want to, and they do not want to, for example, fill out a form or even go online, they can have a conversation with our funding staff instead. And that is another way to apply. So we're really trying to open ourselves up to talk to people and understand. So that's all from me. I'm going to pass over to Alan Anderson.
So I'm Alan, I'm a funding manager at the lottery, and I've been in sports about a year after coming from the voluntary sector. So some of the other innovations that we've looked at. So one of the big ones is our investing in about impact data and evaluation. So, and that's happening at a number of levels. So that's still funding projects. So whether that's, undertaking some small qualitative evaluation, understanding the needs of users, up to some really big data sets. And we're doing that with some of our strategic programs such as Head Start and Better Start. And it's also building those teams. So in-house, we now have a knowledge and learning team who are pulling together. You think about the lottery, the number of projects that we have, the amount of data that's produced by our projects. So how can we, so that's a catalyst to pull some of that information together and really identify what is the best practice across different sectors and different ways of working, whether that's peer support or, delivering mental health services. And of course, Sarah mentioned we changed our name, so we're now the National Lottery Community Fund, and that was to really identify that we are funded by national lottery players and also aligning ourselves much more. You might have seen that the Heritage also have rebranded as National Lottery Heritage Fund, so much more alignment across the lottery funders as well. And the fact that we are actually funding and investing in communities across England and the UK. And in 2019, it will be 25 years that we've actually been running for the lottery and supporting communities. So our funding priorities, so people in the lead, Sarah touched on this, so this is about how our community is much more involved in developing the ideas that are coming to us and how are they involved in actually delivering those ideas as well. Early action, and we'll talk refugee action, will tell us a bit more about that, but we do recognise there's a real role to play in that early intervention. An example of that is with Head Start and some other work we're doing in mental health services. So if we can actually support young people to identify what their needs are around mental health and where they can go for support. Now, we're not going to solve everything around mental health, but at least people will know from an early point of view where to action, where to get support and action that early on. And then we're also looking at relationships. So how do we bring communities together and sustainable places? And a big piece of work we're doing is with Big Local. We've invested 150 million in areas that traditionally wouldn't have access to lottery funding. And how can we do this from a central point of view, organised by local trusts, to really invest in communities at a really kind of hyper-local level to develop those communities and for them to identify what they need to develop their communities as well. And then looking at our UK portfolio, so although we have England, we do work across the UK, really looking at how do we grow great ideas. So there is investment in a good example is St Giles Trust, where they've identified peer support, and how can we roll that out and bring it to more communities across the UK, and bringing people together, investing in projects such as Fun Palaces. You might see these. If you don't check them out, they'll be happening in about October. And again, it's a very local level, bringing people together. Everybody, they say, is an artist, and it's bringing people together around the creative arts. And then supporting charities and communities. So we do about 12,000 grants a year across the UK. And again, that's really focused on supporting local communities, communities of interest, so whether that's in physical places, but it can also be online and digital as well. So, looking at our strategy and supporting charities and community groups. So it really is about empowering communities. How do we give people, make sure they have a voice? How do we make sure that they're really driving forward the services? So one of our projects, we invested quite some money in the Women and Girls Initiative. Some of you might know that. And it was really working with women's organisations. And we have a partnership there of Women's Aid and Safe Lives. And Safe Lives have survivors of domestic abuse who then are on the trustee board and who actually inform service development. And Women's Aid are now rolling out a new programme of how they can work with survivors to inform how services can better respond to their needs. Now that could be healthcare services, social care services, anyone that responds to women who are experiencing or survivors of domestic violence, how can they be better and how can they also work together better to meet the needs of communities. We're developing digital skills. A good example of that is the Royal Society of Blind Children, who've been working with us too, a digital company, and it's about public spaces and how apps can be designed that actually give audio for blind people so they can better navigate around public spaces. Generous leadership, how can we work with organisations to better understand, and we want to look at the ecosystem of the voluntary sector. How can larger organisations be working with smaller organisations? How can those smaller organisations who are often much better at reaching grassroots communities, but bigger organisations who are probably much better at system change, at being able to access policy makers or people like local authorities, how can they come together to actually have much bigger social impact? Building organisational and financial resilience. So we do fund organisations. It's not just about the grassroots, but how can we build the capacity of organisations? So they were going to come here this morning, but the Association of Chairs, who are doing a programme, there we go, fantastic, another one of my grant holders, who are working to build up the governance skills of organisations. And if we can get governance right, organisations are going to be much better able to respond to change and actually plan for the future for their organisations. And again, using data and evidence effectively. So how can we bring this range of evidence and evaluation, how can we really use it to make an impact on services and the communities?